sanctions against North Korea. And joining us now, Professor Hugh Dugan, former advisor to 11 US ambassadors to the United Nations, now at the School of Diplomacy, Seton Hall University in New Jersey. And Professor, unanimous vote means that China and Russia adopted this resolution. That's pretty significant, isn't it?
Yes, it was a very impressive outcome, and particularly since historically China and Russia do not like to reach for the sanctions tool out of the Security Council's toolbox. They would rather use sanctions as a means of persuasion, whereas they see the other members of the Security Council often reaching to sanctions as a means of punitive measure against an offending country.
North Korea, though, as I pointed out to Britain's UN ambassador, has not changed its behaviour as a result of previous sanctions. But I suppose as diplomats, you have to continue trying diplomacy.
Indeed, well, sanctions have been deployed since the 1990s. And currently, there are 13 different sanctions regimes authorized by the Security Council around the world. So they become a very useful tool. They actually exist as the middle ground between war and words. They enable us to respond with some flexibility to situations and to modify them. And you'll find that today's resolution, in fact, builds upon previous sanctions resolutions against North Korea, but indeed also modifies them. And there's the opportunity in the future for a new resolution. Should North Korea indicate an intent to comply, a new resolution might, in fact, modify and adjust the sanctions regime in the opposite direction.
And there seems to be a conviction that these new sanctions will very specifically target the regime rather than the North Korean people.
Yes, the last time a massive sanctions regime was launched was against Iraq and during that crisis, and it wasn't effective. And since then, the UN has used only targeted sanctions, whereby they define the targets, be they persons or industries or sectors of economies, and not blanket sanctions against an entire country. This round of sanctions today is very much a sanction against North Korea from exporting, and that deprives them of capital and resources that they need to fuel their industry to build nuclear program. This also, I think, is somewhat relatively easier for other countries to implement sanctions that restrict export from North Korea rather than sanctions that restrict exports from those countries.
And we'll only know whether they've worked if North Korea doesn't conduct another missile test.
Well, perhaps, and I'm hoping that the leadership there uses this opportunity and finds some kind of a face-saving opportunity to perhaps, since they won't be exporting seafood, perhaps they will let their people consume some more of those products. Perhaps they will be able to say in their twisted narrative that they made a difference, that the world took note of them, that they came to work on a Saturday in the Security Council, that they demanded and achieved the attention that they seem to need to fuel that regime. It's a very sick narrative. He has to show his people that he's in charge, that he's their defender against imminent threat, and that he's their main resource. So perhaps the sanctions today will show that the resources are going to be staying home, and perhaps it gives him some opportunity for some kind of face-saving measure to tell his people that we got everybody's attention, that we made a big splash on the world stage, we have the capacity to do what they think they can do now, and it might in fact sustain his legitimacy in their eyes long enough to satisfy his political ambitions.
Professor, many thanks for being with us. That was Professor Hugh Dugan, former advisor to 11 US ambassadors at the United Nations, now at the School of Diplomacy, Seton Hall University in New Jersey.